What's going on, MMA fans? This is G here with MMA Hype Watch. Today we're going to be talking about UFC 200, which is going to be main evented by Daniel Cormier versus Jon Jones 2. I mean, that's a fight that a lot of people were talking about. Not a fight that a lot of MMA fans really wanted to see, because everybody was still hoping that Conor McGregor will be rematching NAte Diaz at UFC 200 to see how that would have turned out. But this is probably the best that the UFC could do right now. I mean, who else will they have to headline UFC 200? There's no Ronda Rousey. Sage Northcutt is a bust. I mean, Paige Van Zandt is on Dancing with the Stars, and she definitely is not going to be headlining UFC 200. I mean, the UFC right now has only 2 stars, and that is Jon Jones and Conor McGregor. So this seemed like a logical choice for them to actually pick Daniel Cormier versus Jon Jones 2. And I mean, it'll finally settle the score, since it's one of the only real type of grudge matches that they have going on right now. But let's have a serious discussion about Daniel Cormier right now. Daniel Cormier, he's a pretty good champion. I mean, he talks a little bit of trash. He's a good fighter and everything. He's easy to promote, but he just doesn't have those qualities of a champion like Jon Jones does. I mean, Jon Jones, everybody is like, oh, this guy's a good Christian guy, and then they're like, oh no, he's a drug addict, you know, hit and run jailbird who's really just a really big douchebag. But when you come to think about it, Daniel Cormier, he's still a good top tier fighter. I mean, he's taken out Anthony Johnson, he's taken out Alexander Gustafsson, and I mean, hey, what more can you really ask for a guy, you know, to fight the best of the best in the division at that time? The same that Jon Jones has been doing ever since he stepped into the UFC. I mean, minus the fact of, you know, Vladimir Matvisenko. But really, like we're saying, what choice did the UFC really have? I mean, Luke Rockhold versus Chris Weidman 2, that's a pretty decent fight on its own, but it's not a UFC 200 headliner card. This is supposed to be a historic card, something that's supposed to be stuck in the minds of UFC fans for years to come, like UFC 100. MMA fans can still remember the main event and co-main event for UFC 100. Brock Lesnar versus Frank Mir, number 2, and then GSP versus Thiago Alves. And we all remember the pay-per-view buys. 1,600,000 pay-per-view buys for that. Unless they get somebody of championship and MMA superstar caliber to actually headline this card, they were going to lose out on a lot of money. They already dropped Conor McGregor, which is unfortunate at most, considering the amount of weight that Conor McGregor pulls in the UFC, much less with MMA fans. But I mean, I guess they have to save face here and just show that, hey, you can't bully the UFC. You can't leverage MMA fans to push the UFC around to do what you want to do. And they made a pretty firm statement there. I mean, going as far as to pull him off Madison Square Garden at UFC 205, that might be a little bit much. I mean, come on now. It's going to be their first fight in New York, and leaving somebody like Conor McGregor off the card, that seems like a really huge mistake that they probably need to go back and rethink right about now. But other than that, let's have a talk about Jon Jones. The Jon Jones that showed up at UFC 197 was supposed to be the muscular, more fit, you know, improved fighter that a lot of people were thinking was going to show up. With Jon Jones posting all these videos of him working out and lifting heavy weights and just basically looking like a massive gym beast. But when UFC 197 came around, I mean, that's not exactly what he looked like as a fighter. I mean, sure, he could have looked like a beast in the gym, but when he came to fight at UFC 197, it looked like he was gassing early. He just didn't have the output and volume that he usually has in his UFC fights. And even Daniel Cormier knows, he said that Jon Jones that showed up at UFC 197 would not have been able to beat him. And a lot of MMA fans have to agree. I mean, even Greg Jackson himself said, hey, you know, weightlifting is not working. I mean, go listen to the corner interviews. It'll tell you right there. Sure, picking up somebody like OSP and slamming him to the mat for takedowns is really impressive, but would that really work against Daniel Cormier? Is that really what he needs in another fight with Daniel Cormier? Daniel Cormier is pretty much going to come back. He's going to come back twice as hard, and he's going to come back knowing the things that he needed to fix from the first fight, and he's going to apply them to this fight. Jon Jones needs to come back with something more impressive than pickup slams. And even though Jon Jones did not completely gas in the UFC 197 fight, I mean, he looked to have slowed down a lot more than any usual Jon Jones fight before. Even in his fight with Alexander Gustafsson, where it looked like he was losing, he still didn't slow down. He continued to fight. This fight, he just looked slow. He looked a little bit out of it, but not completely terrible and bad for somebody who's been out for 14 months. So we just have to give that to him, and just remember that ring rust is a real thing. But at UFC 197, that is not the Jon Jones that could have beaten Daniel Cormier. So this is pretty awesome that UFC 200 gets Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier as the main event for UFC 200. So, I mean, hey, what more can we really ask for, including the UFC, considering this is the only fight that they could make happen that would bring in the numbers that they would expect for a historical UFC card. Well, MMA fans, give us your thoughts, give us your opinions on what you think about Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier 2 as the main event for UFC 200. I mean, let us know if you think that the Jon Jones that showed up at UFC 197 could actually beat Daniel Cormier. But as always, don't forget to like and don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit that gear button next to the subscribe button and turn on your notifications for us, because sometimes YouTube just likes to forget things like that. So, until next time, this is G here, MMA Hype Watch is out.